please welcome our host, Axios Executive Editor, Mike Allen.
Good morning. Welcome to Axios. Appreciate your being here on this early morning. Hope you dove into the oatmeal bar and got your drizzle options and the other great food that our Axios events team has put out for us here. Very excited today to be kicking off National Governors Association weekend. Governors are going to be here for a couple days, including going to the White House, and we're very excited to be kicking off with a conversation about education, something that touches home to so many people. I'd like to thank the 74 and the Walton Family Foundation for making this conversation possible. Thank the Axios events team for pulling off this amazing space, and all of you for coming out on this early morning. We're going to be covering a little bit about K through 12. We're also going to be talking about how to help older students prepare for the future, and we're going to be pulling back the camera and talking to the governors about the big issues in their states. We're going to be talking first with Governor Roy Cooper of North Carolina, who's a year into it and just had a proposal very relevant to what we're doing. Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper, who's at the end, just gave his final State of the State address, and Governor Jeff Collier of Kansas, a surgeon who just took office. So we have the full lifespan of our governors here. Thank you. We hope that you will join along with hashtag 360, Axios 3, hashtag Axios 360. And we appreciate your reading Axios, where we make you smarter, faster on the big topics that matter most to you. And now we're honored to welcome to the Axios stage Governor Roy Cooper of North Carolina. Good morning, Governor.
Good morning, Mike.
Thank you so much for coming. My family are constituents. We have my brother.
Apex, you say?
Yes, sir. The peak of good living.
Peak of good living.
My brother Scott is in Apex there with his wife Sherry. His son Evan is here, who you just met.
I just want you to know I'm dreaming of oatmeal, brown sugar, and bananas right now.
Well, I think that we could probably make that happen. So while you're here, that will probably happen. Governor, I was saying this is the beginning of National Governors Association weekend, and there's so many rituals that go along with that for governors, for the press, for the staff. And you were telling me that as you get used to your NGA meetings, you said that there's a little North Carolina analogy that comes to mind.
Barney Fife says, "Go, go, go." That's what this is. So we're excited about being here and to talk with you about education, which is, I think, one of the most, if not the most important function of state government.
Now, just last week, Governor, I was telling our guests here that you had a two-pronged announcement, one part having to do with early childhood education, and one of the big goals that you have is reaching more at-risk 4-year-olds. How do we do that?
Well, first, when you look at the education spectrum, getting a career and connecting businesses with people with the skills they need and early childhood are tied together. There's a reason that we have CEOs who are over at the General Assembly arguing for early childhood education and pre-K, because the data is overwhelming that kids who get pre-K and early childhood do significantly better in school and in their career. And anecdotally, I go into a lot of schools. I try to talk to a kindergarten teacher. Most time I go into an elementary school and I say, can you tell the difference between a kid who has had pre-K and who hasn't? They will either roll their eyes and say, of course, and then they'll talk about kids who can't even hold a pencil, don't know their numbers and letters, versus other kids who are very prepared to come into school. So when we have technology executives coming to the North Carolina General Assembly arguing for funding for pre-K, you know that it matters at the end of the day. And I'm very grateful for the fact that General Assembly stepped up this time and was able to eliminate the current waiting list. We had proposed it last year, but what we need to do is to get our percentage of kids in pre-K from the current 38% in North Carolina to at least 55%. Because if we don't get them started right, then it's a long road for them to be ready to read by the 3rd grade and to keep up with their classmates, and particularly to get the kind of skills that they need in this future job market, which is moving quickly. North Carolina is working hard to keep our workforce up with innovation. because we know that the jobs of 2030, about 85% of them have not even been invented yet. So critical thinking skills are going to be
Yeah, so Governor, you were talking last week about high demand fields, and just tick off a couple of those and how you're getting young North Carolinians ready for them.
You know, you've got nursing, you've got data analytics, the technology field is exploding. One of the things we're trying to do is encourage girls to get in, even in elementary and high school, to get into the technology workforce. North Carolina's proud. We're second in the country, only to here in D.C. for women in the technology field. About 38.7% of our women are in technology. Our technology field is 38.7% women. We have this program called Girls Go Cyber, where we're working hard to get them into the marketplace. And we work with businesses to find out what they need, and our workforce is going to be our most important facet of my administration, because we've got to get them ready. I talk to CEOs all over the world in being the chief economic development recruiter for my state, and the number one thing they ask me is, do you have the people? Do you have the workforce? That question comes before taxes. It comes before quality of life. It is the number one question. If you do not have that workforce, they will not come. And we know that in order to have that workforce, North Carolina's got to be a top 10 educated state by 2025. And if I have anything to do with it, which is governor of my state, I expect to, we're going to get there.
And which band are you in now?
Well, you know, I think we are a top 10 educated state when it comes to community colleges and universities. I think we have one of the best, if not the best, state university systems in the country. It's going to be critical for us, though, to continue with funding them. But we've got work to do with pre-K and K through 12. And we have, particularly in our state, where we've got growing, thriving urban areas and rural areas that have been left behind, we've got more and more of a divide in ability and kids who come from different backgrounds. Our state constitution requires that each and every child receive a sound basic education. We've got a court case about that right now. And it is up to us to make certain that every school has a quality principal, every classroom has a quality teacher. And that is our big challenge right now. And you give me those two things, I'll give you a positive school experience.
Right. Well, Governor, that's the aspiration, but of course that isn't yet the reality. So what do you do for students who are now trapped in struggling public schools?
Well, first, you treat the child as a whole. In other words, just sending a child to a school, we expect teachers to fix everything, and they're with them 6 hours a day. If we don't deal with the surrounding services of domestic violence in the home, with substance use disorder, with transportation, with health care of the kids, with counseling, then it's going to be very difficult to meet that demand. I've set up a teacher advisory council. I work closely with the North Carolina Association of Educators, which is affiliated with the NEA, and we ask teachers the kinds of things and the kinds of support that they need. But it's going to take an investment. And one of the mistakes that states are making across the country is they are reducing their tax base to the point where they don't have the funding to invest in public education like they need.
And by reducing their tax base, you're talking about tax cuts.
They're cutting individual income tax and corporate tax in North Carolina year after year after year. And I believe middle class and people who need it should get tax cuts, but not at we shouldn't be cutting taxes for the wealthy and for corporations at the expense of public education. States cannot print money. States cannot lift a debt ceiling. We see some of the after effects of this in some of the Midwestern states that have decided to go this route. And it is intolerable. we have to make sure we invest. And I'm working with chambers of commerce across North Carolina to say to them, now, I'm not saying raise taxes, but what I'm saying is stop these cuts and make your priority public education.
But I want to be sure I understand this, because this is quite interesting. You're saying that when you're talking to CEOs of global companies, and they're talking about coming to the state, they're more concerned about the workforce than the tax rate.
The workforce is the number one thing.
They clearly care about both. Yes.
Obviously, they care about quality of life. They care a lot about where their kids are going to go to school when they move somewhere.
Yes.
They care about low cost of living. They do care about tax structure. They care about economic incentives. But that number one threshold is workforce. And the workforce is changing dramatically even as we speak because of the kinds of skills that people are going to need in these jobs of today and tomorrow. And my effort called NC Job Ready is bringing together businesses. The first thing we're trying to do is to lower the thresholds of educational attainment and making students understand that you don't necessarily need the 2 to 4 year degree, that there are certifications that you can get so that you can make a very good living. Secondly, we're trying to bring the businesses into this. We're creating more internships and apprenticeships and getting more information about what businesses need to do. So this workforce, and then local innovation is critical because urban and rural areas have significant differences in how they approach workforce development because of the different kinds of jobs that are there and available. And you have to make sure that your workforce meets the demands of the businesses that are there and the businesses that you're trying to attract. And I think getting this business community into the state legislatures, in with their governors, to say that education is critical and that we have to invest. We've got to invest wisely, and we can talk about different policies all day about what is going to end up with the best quality education, getting teachers trained in the right way, making sure that they're given the tools that they need to succeed, make sure we measure attainment properly and measure performance both of students and teachers. Accountability is critical, and how we do that is important because we've got to show the taxpayers what they're getting for their investment.
All right, Governor, this is a question from Evan Allen, who's here with his friend Jack. You met them backstage. The North Carolina General Assembly passed a mandate requiring smaller class sizes for K-3 education, which requires hiring more teachers. But you want to raise teacher pay to meet the national average. How are both possible?
Well, first, you've got to have the tax base to make sure that you invest. But this class size that they passed for K-3 is good. You need smaller classes, particularly in elementary schools, but you got to pay for it. And the problem with the class size mandate was that they did not pay for it. And I talked to school superintendents a lot, and I had them over the executive residence just a few weeks before this mandate was to take effect. And I've never seen them this panicked because they were in a situation where they did not have enough classrooms. They did not have enough teachers. They were forced to think about whether they were going to eliminate their music and their art and their computer classes so that they could create the teachers that they need for K-3. They were putting more students in grades 4 through 6 in order, because you squeeze that balloon, it comes out one side and not the other. And they were begging their county commissioners for mobile classrooms. And almost every school system in the state was asking about mobile classrooms. That was driving the price up, and it was a situation that was intolerable. Even this General Assembly came in and said, okay, we got to phase this in. We've got to provide some funding. It was a real victory for voices of parents and principals and teachers and businesses saying, you've got to do something about this. But we do have to get our teacher salaries to at least the national average in order to make sure we attract the kind of teachers that we need to this profession.
Governor, as part of the National Governors Association meeting, you're headed over to the White House. What do you think of the president's idea of having armed teachers?
I think it's ridiculous. I mean, one thing that has done a lot for me, what has impressed me is the students who have stood up and who have come forward after this incident in Florida. I have 3 daughters, millennials. I saw a real change in them. We've seen these shootings before. They have to stop. And when these students get involved and bring their message to Washington and to all of us state leaders, they're saying you've got to do something about this. You've got to have stronger background checks. You've got to raise ages. All options have to be on the table to prevent this senseless gun violence. And we've got to do something. And hopefully, we'll see this push to get something done. The president has said that he was going to do some things, but he said some things before that he hasn't done, so we'll see.
And have you heard from teachers about this, or how do you think this will play with your teachers, or what is your plan for carrying forth this conversation in your state?
I served as Attorney General of North Carolina, and years ago, I helped all the schools to put together their critical incident response kits and their strategy plans if this type of incident were to occur. It's very complicated and coordinated, and we have put those in place. But when you hear a teacher at a Raleigh school the other day, the fire alarm went off, and students did not want to leave the classroom because that's what happened in Florida. The fire alarm was pulled, and this person shot students as they left the building. One teacher even brought their kids into the closet together to protect them. And we're talking about a fire alarm here that went off. That's unacceptable. Our schools should be the safest place ever. My mom was a public school teacher. I'm a product of public schools. My 3 daughters are products of public schools. I believe in the public schools. They should be safe. They should be effective. They've got to create the workforce of tomorrow, and I'm excited about being part of it as governor of North Carolina.
But I hear you saying that in this school shooting, which has played out so much on social media, I hear you saying that there are after effects, follow-on effects, even in your schools.
Yes, I think they are all over the country. And how can you not think about it as a parent, as a student who goes to these schools? And when you know you have those who are out there who are thinking about doing this kind of thing, and we've got to find a way to deal with this, and all options have to be on the table, and we have to be strong, and we have to stand up to opposition, and we have to make sure we make changes so that our kids are safe and they can learn. That's what they're there to do.
Penultimate question, what did you learn about education from being a Sunday school teacher?
That was one of my favorite jobs, was Sunday. I taught all my kids all the way through. I learned that lesson preparation is a difficult job, and that teachers, just the time they're in school, that's not even the half of it. I used to see my mom prepare her lessons time and time again, and I knew that was hard work. That's probably the hardest thing about it.
And you went to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill as a
Go
Moorhead Scholar. A week from tomorrow, we have Duke, North Carolina, or a week from today. Duke is favored. What say you?
I say Carolina's going to win the second time for the year. That's what I say. And people will tell me, hey, you're from North Carolina, you're governor of the whole state. And I've got a lot of friends at Duke, a lot of supporters, and it is a tremendous university. But when it comes time to play basketball, you got to be true to yourself, okay? Got to be true to yourself.
Governor Roy Cooper, what
Thanks.
a treat. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
Good luck with Go, Go, Go.
You got it.
And we're going to get you that oatmeal on your way out the door. So thank you very much, Governor Roy Cooper, for giving us those first-person insights about the conversation. By the way, I want to thank C-SPAN for carrying this. And now we're going to have a video from the 74 and the Walton Family Foundation made this conversation possible. Back in a second.
We've seen this cascading amount of technology and innovation just overwhelming us. If you think about just the last 5 or 6 years, the amount of innovation in artificial intelligence, in big data analytics, in wireless technologies.
We are the world's leader on innovation. It's going to be hard for us to compete with the world on price. So we've got to compete with the world on quality and make those opportunities available to a more and more diverse population every day.
The stakes, they couldn't be higher. We've got a generation of students and families who are thinking about their future and who are trying desperately to access their best future.
For me, it's the greatest divide in our country, more than race, more than economics. Give me the poorest child from the toughest community, put them in a great early childhood program, give them great teachers, put them in a high school that has AP classes, and I'm actually wildly hopeful, wildly optimistic about where that young person's going to be.
It is time for education reform to wake up and acknowledge foundation is important. We can't let it go, but it is strictly foundation. We've got to, if you will, build the house.
No longer can we rely on the traditional ways of educating our students if we want them to be truly college and career ready.
Education is a matter of getting ready for a strong economy and good jobs. It's also a matter of helping students, all students, have a chance to succeed.
The state of education, in my view, in America today is far below what it needs to be if this country is to succeed in giving every kid from every zip code, from every community, a fair shot at the American dream.
Thank you very much to the 74 and the Walton Family Foundation for this great conversation. Welcome back. Thank all of you for joining Axios, where our events follow our smart brevity format that you get on Axios.com and on our newsletters. And now we're honored to welcome to the stage a governor who just gave his final State of the State address, and so has done the NGA circuit quite a few times. It's on our honor to welcome Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper. Good morning, Governor. Thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate it. You were just telling me backstage about a morning ritual that you have with your phone.
And I left my cell phone, luckily, off stage right. So every morning I have a counter, as does all my cabinet. This morning it says 321 days left in our administration. So we've got a bunch of stuff, a lot of it educationally oriented, a lot of programs that we want to finish very strong. And if you're trying to worry about your next job, or people are not really focused on finishing what they've started, then you don't get the same outcomes.
Now, Governor, you've seen education from a variety of perspectives. I first knew you as mayor of Denver, where you marketed the city for the 2008 Democratic Convention, which wound up making history with
President Barack Obama.
Where it was the first convention where there was so much excitement they had to move the final event to a bigger.
Oh my gosh, to be blunt, Jim Messina, who was kind of running candidate Obama's campaign at that time, calls up, and I think it was 12 days before his acceptance speech, and said, you know, you were going to do it in the Pepsi Center, and we like that, but would it be possible to move it maybe a half a mile south to Mile High Stadium, to the Invesco Field at Mile High?
How much trouble could that be?
12 days, and you have no idea how much the number of the fiber optics and cable that you would have stretched from coast to coast, and that's how much we had to move and put in place. But we did it. That was quite. Having been there, I think everyone who was in that stadium that night will remember it for the rest of their lives, because it was an electric moment where the country really came together in hope and change.
And Governor, now you've been traveling the country, and what would you say is the biggest mistake we make with K-12 education?
You know, and I think the mistake we've made right now is we have tried to create a one-size-fits-all solution, and people are so, they look at their children's education as something, part of their intimate life, something, a question they care about probably more than almost anything else in their daily routine. And I've bitten into this for a while there. I thought that longer school days, longer school years was the answer, right? We keep looking for the answer. And I think there's probably an assemblage of answers, but I think more importantly, we've got to reach out and engage school districts and especially parents and have them, feeling that they're part of the discussion and that they own the decision. Because one thing we've seen in Colorado again and again You know, when I ran for mayor in 2003, and I'd never run for student council or, you know, class dishwasher, and I promised. Actually, I had a young man helping me, volunteering on my campaign by the name of Michael Bennett, and he said, if you
Now Senator Bennett,
you should say that if I get elected, unlike other school districts where the mayor and the superintendent never talk to each other because they're chosen and elected separately, we'll be the first city where I'll visit every public school in my first 4 years. And I said, great, I'll do it. And I said it. Later, Michael would say, well, maybe if you'd been better staffed, someone would have pointed out there are 161 schools. So I went to a school every week for 4 years and, you know, really immersed myself. And Michael, of course, 2 years later, became the superintendent of schools in Denver and played, I think, a staggeringly important role in really transforming Denver public schools. That process of meeting all those schools, all those teachers, all those parents, we try to meet with a bunch of parents at every single school after we visit the classrooms. And it really drove home the fact that everybody had the same, it's amazing, everyone kind of loved their school, thought their teachers were great, everyone thought the overall school system was failing. And obviously that's impossible. So
well, but there are schools that are failing, and what do you think we should do for students who are stuck going to them?
I think, I think Denver's a good model, and we do this probably in a less successful format statewide. But if you've got a failing school, you've got to be willing to step up and, you know, try to provide the tools for massive changeover. But in some schools, the culture is so bad that you need to close the school, you know, clean it out, and then reopen it. And that has, in many cases, proven successful. And Michael Bennett started that. He was superintendent for 3 years. Tom Boasberg has been superintendent now for, gosh, almost 10 years. And you see the outcomes. In the last decade, Denver Public Schools has reduced their dropout rate by 70%. And a lot of that is taking failing schools and getting them, I mean, if a failing school doesn't engage their kids at all, and the kids can't wait to drop out. Well, when you've got a better school system with less failing schools, you're going to have a much lower dropout rate.
So these teachers are so heroic, so many of them buying supplies with their own money. Governor Cooper was talking about just like how much time they spend out of the classroom preparing. My mother, Barbara, was a first grade teacher. Our CEO, Jim Vandehei, has a sister who is a special education teacher in Wisconsin. As you were visiting, Governor, there was 161, right?
Back then, now I think they're about 190.
As you were visiting those schools, tell us about a classroom that was memorable or a school that was different, a principal or a teacher who somehow had found something that works, had cracked the code.
Well, and again, I could spend all morning talking about it. There were so many examples of, one of the things I loved most was when local businesses would connect. And there was a middle school, and they're right behind a large cheese manufacturer, Leprino Foods. And they didn't know it, but Leprino was constantly finding ways to get them free cheese, free food. And then he started following the kids from middle school as they went through high school and funding mentors. Wow. And then started funding the kids to go to college. So he became part of, we have a thing called the Denver Scholarship Foundation that, so Leprino Foods helped focus on, actually don't repeat that because he doesn't like the name of the company ever to be used. I should be more careful.
Governor, I have a special interest in mentoring. I wonder what you have found as the most successful non-bureaucratic approach to mentoring. If someone wants to help a school in their area that maybe doesn't have the resources of some other schools, what can you do?
So this is my opinion, and I'm not a professional on this, but if I were able to wave a magic wand and look at some of these cloud-based technology companies, if there were a way to get past all the federal laws about sharing information about kids and is it health related, most mentors are not there when the kids need them. And when you look at-risk kids, especially like when they move, right? So this kid's 7th grade, 12, 13 years old, and they move because and again, low-income families are moving all the time, right? Oftentimes once or twice a year. So they move into a different neighborhood, a different school district. That magnifies the risk of that kid dropping out by about 4 times, 5 times. huge risk. And yet, the mentor programs we have, the rec centers, all the different, big brothers, big sisters, all that stuff, no one has a system by which we connect all of that support that we've created for these at-risk kids. And there ought to be a way through technology that when those kids move, everybody gets alerted. And I mean, in many cases, the kids come into the new schools, and the new schools are so busy that no one really pays attention to that kid who often feels like an outsider. They don't have the same social support, the same friends and network of support in their school. Their parents don't have it at home. If there was some way to do that, I think that would be very powerful, so that mentors, and the other thing is just to listen to the kids. If I was going to give the other thing, I once was backstage at a thing with Meryl Streep, and she had 4 kids, and you never hear about her kids. Her youngest daughter is an actress, so you hear occasionally about the youngest daughter. But I said, how do you raise kids that are having real normal jobs and normal lives? And she said, my husband and I never talked about our careers. Every conversation at the dinner table, every conversation with our kids was always about their lives, their world, what was going on with them, and really trying to listen more deeply. And I think that's pretty good advice for mentors as well.
Now, you're a celebrity governor. Everybody's interested in what you have to say. You're headed over to the White House as part of this National Governors Association meeting. What are you going to say to President Trump about his idea of perhaps paying bonuses to teachers who decide to and are trained to take their guns to school?
I think he's heard enough in the last 24 hours. I probably don't need to say anything. Obviously, when I went to all those schools, and even back then, people were discussing whether to arm. Ever since Columbine, which was 1999, this has been an issue. And I can't remember. I have met a few teachers that thought that was a good idea and would do it. Almost every teacher thought it was a terrible idea. They thought it would make the schools less safe. I mean, if you look at people with handguns in their bedrooms to protect themselves, more often than successful protection, it's used against them. So you'd have to train teachers at a level that most teachers, they'd have to train teachers about things they don't want to learn about. I just think, I'm looking forward to talking to President Trump about other things in terms of education, which I do think, and certainly in terms of gun safety, that he wants to ban bump stocks. Let's get to work, right? Raise the age everywhere for kids to be able to own an assault weapon. Well, that's the first step towards making sure that assault weapons are pulled out.
We're going to come back to what else you're going to tell them, but two more on guns. One, sadly because of Columbine, Colorado does know best practices. It's something that's been a topic in your state longer than it's been a topic everywhere. What has Colorado learned through that tragic event that other schools should know? What works? What are best practices to reduce the likelihood of something like this?
So obviously, training, and depending on your school's makeup, but I think nowadays pretty much every school has security. Certainly every high school does that I'm aware of. Most every middle school. I don't think there's a single one thing that makes sense. Obviously, having everybody trained in terms of what happens if there's a shooter. But we've seen again and again that human failure, right? So even we have universal background checks. We got that passed in 2014. Even with universal background checks, even with all kinds of restraints, security people will make mistakes. And having guns so available to so many people makes the task of keeping schools safe, almost impossible. And obviously we have school-free or gun-free schools, and I don't think in any way that makes them more vulnerable. I don't think the data reflects that, and I don't think that's an accurate statement in any sense.
So you think that the proposal from the president is?
I think it's dead on arrival. I think that's a horrible phrase. I didn't mean that. I don't think it's going to get traction. Even every Republican I know doesn't think that's a great solution even in the Old West, right? Colorado is a representation of the Old West. As a community became more successful, they would make you check your 6-gun at the town gate, old Dodge City when Wyatt Earp was getting his training. the idea was to get guns out of the everyday situations of life. Because again, alcohol, people's emotional makeup, their tempers, whatever, if there are guns everywhere, bad things are going to happen. So often suicides. You look at the number of suicides that are gun related, probably I think it's over half nationally now. That many people that want to take their own life, it's a momentary, it's a phase, it's a period of depression or bipolar disorder. They're having a very serious event, and they want to kill themselves. Many times when if they get past that, they can't immediately put their hands on a gun. And I think this is, I don't have data, but I think it is exaggerated even more in kids, that they are more subject to these emotions. If you can make it harder for them to get their hands on a gun, once they get through that period, then they go on, they live their whole lives.
And for the teachers, I had not heard that before. I thought that was interesting what you were saying, drawing the analogy to the statistics about what happens to people who have guns in their homes.
Right. I think that's it's a misconception that having guns, in your bedroom drawer is going to make you safer. Most people who do that, well, it's not most, but it makes you. The statistics I saw, and this is some years ago, you were more likely to have that gun used against you than you were to successfully defend your home.
Governor of the Atlantic did an article in 2014 said no single issue altered Hickenlooper's fortunes more than gun control. Colorado is one of the most politically interesting states because it is the Mountain West and because it is growing so fast. Some people argue, sort of before this election, they sort of argued that it was, along with Nevada, one of the swingiest swing states. What have you learned in your hard-won experience for modern Democrats about how to navigate gun control?
Well, I think that part of the problem is a reflection of the continued divide between rural America and urban America, urban-suburban America. And I think, again, it's almost a different facet of what Lincoln talked about when he talked about a house divided against itself shall not long stand. I think we've got to fix it. And anybody who lives in an urban area and thinks that they're not dependent on where their food comes from is crazy, right? And we oftentimes don't do a good enough job in urban areas going out and getting involved in the rural parts of the state, representing those self-interests and making sure that people get a real chance. I mean, a real chance if they're living and they're raising cattle, they're growing corn, get a real chance to be appreciated. And I think we put a lot of time over the last 6 or 7 years of going out and trying to listen harder. I mean, if you want to persuade someone to think about an issue differently, don't tell them why you think they're wrong. I think it's better just to keep asking. This is an old trick from the restaurant business. I spent 15 years in brew pubs. And if you get people to repeat back why they feel so strongly about something and use their words, keep asking them questions about their concerns, it almost always makes them think about the issue in different ways, just by the fact that they're getting a chance to be heard and they feel heard and they become more open to some sort of compromise. And I think that's what's guns long term. You go back to when we, in the Great Depression, I think it was 1933 or 1934, I think they outlawed the Thompson submachine gun, which was invented right at the end of World War I. There was no market for it, so they originally sold the Tommy gun as a self-defense, a weapon to be used for your own personal self-defense. It's a machine gun, automatic weapon. And of course, after all the bootleggers used Tommy guns, Machine Gun Kelly, the St. Valentine's Day massacre, basically, the American public had enough. And when Franklin Roosevelt became president, he ran on gun safety of getting rid of some of these really violent forms. And that was one of them.
So the takeaway for the modern Democratic Party is?
Well, I think the takeaway for the modern Democratic Party is to keep listening and to allow public sentiment at a certain point. And we're there. I think this might well be a tipping point where it's been incremental, and now people are going to move and say, all right, let's raise the age for assault weapons, and let's look at maybe assault weapons should belong in a shooting range and don't need to be taken home, shouldn't be used for everyday life.
So for people who are tweeting along at #Axios360, that's news, that's a good tweet. Tell us about this tipping point. What is it that you believe is the tipping point?
Well, I've had people in my office in the last few days that are so fed up, and a couple of them are Republicans, conservative people saying, enough is enough. I'm going to put my dollars I'm going to go against my party. I'm going to put my dollars towards electing people that will enact reasonable, thoughtful gun safety measures. And I think that process of having it stop being so partisan and get down to just the basic common sense. We are allowing ourselves to be terrorized. If you wanted to look at if you were someone in a basement in Leningrad and you wanted to hurt America as badly as you could, what better way than to make our children feel that they're unsafe at school, that they shouldn't go to school, that while they're at school they're anxious, they won't learn as well, you'll cripple a whole generation. We're allowing this to be done to ourselves.
You've been traveling the country with the Ohio Governor, John Kasich. You're a Democrat. He's a Republican. Throughout your career, you have tried to focus on less partisan issues. But what have you learned from actually traveling, appearing with a Republican?
I had dinner with John last night. And, he is so much, when I ran for mayor in 2003, as I said, the first election I ever did, John Kasich back in, I think, 1994 became the chair of the Senate or the House Budget Committee. He's been there for so long, and he really gives me a great perspective. And I came out of the restaurant business, and in the restaurant business, when you're in the weeds, when there's a big rush, everybody's the same, right? It doesn't matter whether you're tall or short, black or white, straight or gay, you're all in it together. So by my nature, I'm less partisan than most people, and governors are generally less partisan. Kasich is a classic case in point that he's a Republican, but he cares more about the country and more about his state, and that the partisanship, and again, he thinks, and I think he is a good Republican, at least in the old sense about what being a Republican meant. I think that the willingness of people to get past the partisanship is the only way this country's ever created good legislation.
A New Yorker article called you the middleman. Is there really a market for the middleman?
Well, it's hard to say. Certainly at times there's not, and there's an awful lot of, we were saying backstage, anger is the new black. I think there is a real frustration among a lot of people, and that pushes people towards the extremes. But I do think most great solutions come as a result of compromise, and compromise almost always moves you somewhere closer to the middle.
What are the chances that the buddy picture of you and Governor Kasich becomes a presidential ticket?
I think that's probably a kind of a long shot, and for a couple of reasons. One, we both like to joke about it, but our politics today, whether we like it or not, most of the funding for national campaigns comes out of people that have a strong tie to one party or the other, and they fight relentlessly to support their party's candidate. There are some people out there that would fund an independent campaign, but not at the same level that you would need to really be credible. So you'd be making a statement, and sometimes I think symbolic statements are powerful. But I think Kasich's got some more public service in him, and I might as well. So we'll have to see how that works out.
And what is it, 352 days?
No, 321 days.
Okay, so 321 days. What is your next act in public service?
Well, we're working right now on a number of projects I'm so excited about. We talked a little bit there backstage about, 2/3 of our kids are never going to get a 4-year college degree. That's been true for almost 30 years. We've tried everything. We're now doing an apprenticeship program, not just for trades, but for bankers, insurance companies, advanced manufacturing, allowing kids to, their last 2 years of high school, actually go work 3 days a week and then get trained in a curriculum or learn a curriculum that helps them more successful. We're tying that into a partnership with LinkedIn and Microsoft and the Markle Foundation called skillful.com. That's skills-based discussion. So as people go through their whole lives, they can assemble skills and see what skills they're missing if they want to trade professions. And this stuff is so exciting, and I think we're out ahead of the rest of the country. This kind of Swiss model of apprenticeships is, I think, going to be a big change and a big improvement in this country. The moment I start worrying about, well, what am I going to do next? Not only do I get distracted, but my cabinet members, we just hired this great new Secretary of Education who's going to be amazing. Everyone gets distracted. So I think we've got 321 days of focus. Not to say that my wife and I don't occasionally have discussions, but we're focused on getting things done.
How does she feel about your running for president?
Oh, my My wife is a senior executive for a $75 billion company. She thinks it's hilarious, but she also thinks it's interesting. So we'll see what those discussions, where they go.
We're getting the hook here just across the T. You mentioned independent candidacies. Do you think an independent candidacy is feasible in America at this moment?
At this moment, no, not in a way that's viable, where you could win. I think an independent candidacy could have power in terms of getting some statements out.
And last question, there were two firsts when you became governor of an American state. You're the first geologist to ever be a governor,
right.
And you were the first brew pub owner since
the first brewer since Sam Adams in whatever it was 1792 to become a governor.
And besides to listen to the people, what did you learn about running a brew pub that helps you govern?
Oh, and again, I could go on for that. Again, I would say the most important thing is you learn in any restaurant, any real service industry, there's no margin, there's no profit in having enemies. No matter how unreasonable that person is, listen, keep talking, work it out in whatever way you can, because there's always a tomorrow. And in politics now, so many of these politicians define themselves by who their enemies are and how they can put them down. That's never constructive.
What a treat. Thank you very much, Governor Hickenlooper. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much. Thank you. Have a great National Governors Association. Appreciate the conversation and the life advice. And now we're going to hear a video from the 74 and the Walton Family Foundation, who made this great conversation possible. Back in a jiffy.
In state government, education is the biggest thing. And if governors want to attract jobs, high quality of life, good health care, you name it, then having a strong education system is essential to that.
If you're governor and you want to just cut ribbons and be popular and just kind of be in that little happy space, you're missing the chance to really make a difference in the lives of people. Education is perhaps the most important, but there are many other policy areas.
We need folks who are thinking about solutions and putting the solutions above everything else, including demands and sacred cows and constituencies that should come second to students.
It is an incredible honor to serve our kids and our country, but it is a courageous honor.
So always look for governors who are willing to challenge the status quo and challenge some of the orthodoxies within their own base. And that's a really hard thing to do. It's a hard thing to ask politicians. But if you want to break through, if you want to have real courage, that's who's going to make a difference in kids' lives.
My advice to governors is to lead this, to get out there. It's not going to be easy. I mean, I've been actively involved with many governors over the course of the last decade who care about these issues, and it's controversial and it's challenging because the status quo forces are so powerful.
If we don't put education first, and if governors don't learn how to give it leadership and are willing to give it their own time and effort and their own strength, it's not going to happen.
Thank you very much for that message. And now we welcome to the Axios stage, Romy Drucker. Now we welcome to the Axios stage, Romy Drucker, co-founder and CEO of the 74. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming. So we've been talking about it from a government point of view, but you're about to do it. You're about to start a charter school. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so thank you for having me, and thank you to the Walton Family Foundation for the sponsorship. My day job is running a nonprofit news site called The 74, where education is front page news every day, but I believe so fundamentally in this issue and issues of equity, and I am also in the process of starting a public charter school in Brownsville, Brooklyn, which is one of the neediest neighborhoods in central Brooklyn. The public school down the street from where we're opening has an ELA and math proficiency rate of about 2%, and so it's a neighborhood that's truly in need of high quality options, and we believe that our school will bring that to the community.
So to tell you about the 74 real quick, you started the 74 with?
I started the 74 with journalist Campbell Brown, who is also a fierce education advocate. And she and I had a passion for better storytelling around this issue and really making sure that it was part of the conversation. Obviously, the news cycle is crazy, and so we wanted to create a news organization that was fully focused on both the nutritious and the delicious stories of education. So what's broken about the system, but also the inspiring stories, the hero stories, the stories of teachers and students, and all of the amazing work happening out there in the field.
Now, speaking of heroes, just kidding, but this is the National Governors Association, and as part of your coverage, you're going to be delving into 36 governors' races.
We are, and this was a big issue for us in the 2016 election as well. We actually launched the site in New Hampshire. We had 6 of the Republican candidates at that time talking one-on-one with Campbell Brown about education. This cycle, there are 36 gubernatorial races, as you said, and dozens of state races where education truly deeply matters to people. It always comes up in polls as a top voter issue, but it doesn't always seem like that's how voters vote when they get to the voting booth. And so our job is to help unpack and translate the policy, help people understand the local issues, but also the national conversation about innovation and equity.
And you have a Harvard MBA. What happens at Harvard when it comes to K through 12 education? Like, what does higher education, what more could higher education do for elementary education?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and we heard this from Governor Cooper and Governor Hickenlooper, a couple things. One, we need bright ideas right now in education, especially in K-12. We need smart, innovative solutions to fixing really deep and systemic challenges, because 50% of kids in this country can't read or do math on grade level. So we just need spark. We need intellectual spark. We also need CEOs and business leaders to be taking a stance on this. Today's kids are tomorrow's workforce, and so it's exciting to hear how some of the governors are partnering with their local business communities to create pipelines, to create programs, but we have to be thinking about this on a continuum from K through college. We have a college completion problem in this country, so we need to be thinking about ways to address that as well, in particular for the neediest students. But this is an issue, a fundamental issue in our society that's going to require public, private, and philanthropic partnership in order to make our country a better place.
One more topic, and then we're going to bring the editor-in-chief of Axios, Nick Johnston, is going to drop some smart brevity on us. So he's going to talk to us a little bit about our coverage of some of these big issues right after this. But I wanted to ask you about your experience in New York City. You worked in New York City schools at a time when reform was a hot topic.
Yeah, so I worked in New York City public schools when Michael Bloomberg was mayor of New York City and Joel Klein was the school's chancellor. And when they took office, graduation rates in New York City were around 50%. The system was highly politicized, and Black and brown students in the city were not being served well. And so their mission, and the mission of our work, was to address fundamental challenges in the system to better serve the city's neediest students. And that entailed closing and replacing failing schools with new district and charter schools, breathing new life into communities, raising teacher salaries, strengthening partnerships with civic groups around the city. But fundamentally, we needed to ensure that every student had access to a great school, and that's work that still continues today.
And we always finish with one fun thing, and you were telling me at breakfast that you read novels, and you were telling me there's a very specific read.
Well, everyone needs a little escapism these days, right? So whether it's Netflix or novels, we all need a little break from the news. And this is such an important issue here today. I'm so happy to be focused on it, but I'm sure everyone this weekend will take maybe a little tiny break from the news cycle. But thank you so much again, Mike, for doing this. This is incredible. Education is such an important issue, and we really appreciate it.
Romy Drucker, thank you for the conversation. Good luck with your charter school. And now we welcome to the Axios stage our editor-in-chief, Nick Johnston. Nick Johnston, who helped who is an architect of smart brevity. We're about to hear from Governor Collier of Kansas, but before that, Nick is going to give us the why it matters real quick on these midterm elections. Romy was just talking about how they're very focused on 36 governor's races, and Nick, who came to Axios from Bloomberg, was one of our the first members of the Axios family. When you came to Axios, all we had was a
blank whiteboard. That I guess right? Yes. My jersey number is 5.
So for an all hands at Axios, we did. Everybody had a jersey, all 100 Axians, and the founders were 0, and Nick is 5. But you were just helping us plan our midterm coverage. And what is going to drive that coverage over the next 8 months?
I think what we're most interested in is getting to the why it matters, is like who's going to be in charge of the House of Representatives, who's going to be in charge of the United States Senate. And if the House is truly in play, as a lot of Democrats say and a lot of Republicans worry, that's going to have a massive impact on President Trump's agenda, on what the politics going forward, and what kind of policy actions are taken. And so when my reporters come in and they start telling me stories they want to write about the midterms and sort of what kind of things they want to follow, it's like you got to get to that point, sort of like who is the person that's going to be elected Speaker of the House next year. That's the key point.
Now, Nick, when you were at Bloomberg working under the lash of Al Hunt, you were often sent out to drop into a Senate race or drop into a House race. And what did you learn by some of that immersion journalism out among our hot races?
I think what's really valuable is to get out of Washington and actually meet people. There are still ways, and we have a reporter, I think, in California today who's sort of meeting with local Democrats. You can learn a lot sort of getting out of this bubble. It's such a cliche, but it's so, so true to get out of these towns. That's why I love having governors up here, because their perspective is so much different than a lot of the senators and a lot of the representatives that we see every single day. So you get out there, you drive up and down the highways, you listen to what's on the radio, you watch the local news, you read the local papers, you speak to people, in diners and in bars or at airports, and you learn a lot about what's on their mind. I think it's fascinating. The tipping point, is it the tipping point on gun control? Like, we'll learn that, I think, what people in Washington are hearing from their constituents. And when they come back, that will seep in. And that's, I think, the stories we try and tell in the midterm coverage, again, to get to that point. What happens in that vote and who's going to be in charge next year.
When we think about how people vote, especially your swing voter, your person who isn't necessarily super partisan, super political, like education is a big driver of that. And like you think about how does government touch me? If nothing's going wrong, the way the government most touches me is education.
Right. I think it's a hugely local issue, which is why I think from mayors, from state and county superintendents, and for governors. And I think it's something that doesn't drive as much maybe as the passion, especially on issues like maybe gun control or immigration. But I thought it was great, the governor saying up here, it's like, this is what you talk about with your kids every single day. Like, I have 2 kids who go to school here in the District of Columbia, and that's like I think about that every single day. I walk them to school. It's such an important daily part of your life, I think, for American families, which is why I think it's such an important issue for these governors.
Now, Nick is the editor-in-chief of Axios, so he's responsible for all of our editorial coverage, helped build that amazing team. And you started having a Thursday afternoon meeting. It turns out that just by the quirks of scheduling, the one time that everyone in the news department is working is Thursday at 12:30, so Nick has a meeting then. But yesterday we were having a conversation, a little discussion broke out about one of the reasons it's so hard to cover Trump. As you worked with both our veteran reporters and our rising stars on covering Trump, what are some of the traps and tricks?
I think as you wrote today, a lot of it is who knows what Trump is thinking, and that a lot of his aides, and they're telling you and the amazing Jonathan Swan, they think they know what's happening, but they don't really know what's happening. It's very hard to get through that. And then as you move layers and layers around that, there are so many different people in the White House, in the broader administration, and on the Hill who think they know and are trying to tell you what they think they know, or just outright spreading falsehoods to try to achieve their goals. And what the long lesson we have with our reporters is check it again, and then check it a third time, because it's very difficult to find that real truth, that actual worthy Axios news story in that cloud.
So Nick and I have known each other since the Washington Post. I was a reporter. Nick was a news aide. As a news aide at the Washington Post, what was one of your memorable duties?
My first day at the Washington Post, I collected mail and met David Broder, but one of my weekly duty was to FedEx the Sunday paper to Ben Bradley's house in the Hamptons.
I think we're dating ourselves. But since that time at the Washington Post, something that you and I, something has really changed is that now, like, people are actively out to get reporters, are actively out to get news organizations. That's a change.
It is a big change. It is so much easier. I mean, when I was at the Washington Post, one of my jobs was to answer the phone. That's how you got reporters. You would call me when I was 22 years old and you would yell at me. Now there are so many different mechanisms to go out and attack reporting or to confuse reporting or to muddle reporting. We wrote a story in Axios the other day about the conspiracy theories that all of a sudden started to swirl around the students involved in the Parkland shooting. And it's incredibly difficult as we're being bombarded all these different ways to kind of cut through that. And I see it a lot on the internet. I spend too much time on Twitter and I just watch the way people who either disagree with us or criticize us just attack our reporters. It's something we thought about very much when we launched Axios. It's sort of, what do I do if one of my reporters suddenly becomes a target of either side for some of their reporting on social media? I mean, it's a much different time than it was, although when we were much younger.
So there's a news, what's the box on the cover of, on the homepage of Axios that you can write into the news desk?
It says contact newsroom and it comes to me.
And yes, and lots of people do. I look at it, I'm not sure people do that. Lots of people do, like and I'm on the replies, and like you're very good at like really embracing the spirit of people's questions. But what we see in that email is surprisingly often people assume ill motives.
Right. They're very much, I see the partisanship seep into that. What blows me away is people write me incredibly angry, all caps, profane emails from their personal email accounts with their names next to them, calling me all sorts of horrible things or disparaging my reporters. And I try and write back to all of them and ask, like, why are you so angry? Like, what story made you so upset? You know, and actually a couple of times there's been a little bit of a dialogue where they've apologized and like maybe they were just spun up at a moment. Or what really I think is valuable is they raise realistic criticisms or like valuable ones. Like, you know what, we could have been a little smarter on that headline or a little more clever about how we phrased that story. And it's just sort of, you know, my very tiny attempt to raise the level of discourse in this great nation.
I think people appreciate the fact that you take what they say seriously, but something that has been very important to us at Axios over the last year is in these most partisan of times, like staying in the middle of the road, making sure that we can illuminate both sides, like being fair to both sides, holding both sides accountable. And over a year, we've been able to do that, but you often get people writing in, making an assumption one way or making an assumption the other way, and that's why I always love that question, like what story in particular are you thinking of?
Well, I mean, I'm happy that in that email inbox, I'm pretty equally criticized for being a Trump apologist or a blind Trump supporter. So I know we're kind of doing it right. But I'm hypervigilant about that. I'm hypervigilant about how reporters act on Twitter, how they behave on television, because there's a lot of people in America who are looking for reasons to doubt journalism, and so you have to be very vigilant about not giving them.
And last question for you, Nick Johnson. In addition to the midterms, what do you think is going to be a theme? What's going to be a theme of our coverage this year, or what's something else that people can look forward to on Axios?
I love our coverage on the future of work. I think that fits in great on education. The governors were very smart about sort of this is educating workforces. So many of the jobs that are going to be around in 5 years and 10 years don't even exist now. And so how do we create a workforce that can do those jobs?
Nick Johnson, thank you for your hard work.
Thank you.
At Axios, we appreciate you. Thank you very much. And now it's our honor to welcome to the Axios stage the Governor of Kansas, Dr. Jeff Collier. Governor, what a treat. Thank you very much for coming.
Thanks for having us.
Honored to have you on your stage. This is you were Lieutenant Governor, but this is your first time to sort of do the National Governors Association circuit, right?
That's right, and it's been a great event. We started out here, saw a bunch of old friends. We have a lot of lieutenant governors who've moved up to governor this year. You were maybe the only person here who was surprised to become governor. Tell them real quick how you became governor on the day that you did. Oh, on the day that I did was, Well, Governor Brownback resigned and became an ambassador for religious liberty. But actually, on the day that I became governor, we've been kind of waiting a little while, and people said it had to align for the stars. And on that day in Kansas, where I'm from, that was the first time we had a supermoon, a blue moon, which is 2 full moons, a total eclipse, and a blood red moon in 700 years. So we got the stars aligned.
Touche. And on your first day as governor, you visited a public school.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what did you learn from that? And what was the symbol you were trying to send, or what was the message you were trying to send by having that be one of your first day activities? You went to Hays, Kansas.
Hays, Kansas, which is where I'm from. I'm a 5th generation Hays kid. One of the very creative things that we're seeing is communities have different solutions. And one of the big challenges that we had is children that were in school, but they may have a mental health issue. And it may either disrupt school or they can't help the kid properly. And so this school actually serves kids from kindergarten all the way up through high school. And they surround about 30 counties all around. And that's where they can actually go and have counseling and additional help to get them through. And that's very important to me. Education is a critical piece for our state and for every state. But as I see us growing, and Kansas is a happening place, as we're growing, we're focusing on that, and we're focusing on these really hard challenges. And we're seeing some success.
Governor Collier, in your first joint address, you said, "I keep a surgeon's schedule, not a politician's." What did you mean by that?
The staff will tell you about that one. But no, I think you need to be very engaged, and you're going to just see me out a lot. My work week normally as a surgeon is an 80-hour or a 90-hour work week, but you're going to be out visiting with people. You're going to do things. You get things done. You look at the healing. You look at the timing of it. But we're going to be we're very active, and already we've been across 20 different communities in the state.
Now, Governor, the financing of education in Kansas is extremely complicated. You have a lot of rocks in your backpack, but when you gave your 4 points about K through 12 education in your joint address, you said, most importantly, we must insist on accountability and improved outcomes. Talk about accountability.
Yeah. Accountability is the results. And for me, in order to get accountability, you need transparency, you need data. And I'm a surgeon, that's how I live. And so to get these outcomes, we have great kids. We need to make sure that we have, for example, a graduation rate that's over 85% statewide. If you change that number 5%, that dramatically changes our entire trajectory for the next few years. And so that's very important. It's also very achievable. So what we're putting down is we're putting down benchmarks so that people can say, this really is working for us. How, we have sustainable funding, we're going to have results. And it also ultimately means that our kids see their future in Kansas.
Now, Governor, you were a White House fellow. You will now be going to the White House as governor. What's that going to be like?
It was a lot of fun when I was White House fellow to President Reagan, and then stayed on for President Bush. And I did foreign affairs and had an office in the OEOB as well as over at the State Department.
This was back, they had the window air conditioners?
Oh, yeah, we had window air conditioners. Well, I can actually remember a time when you could go, when I was in college, you could actually walk through the front gate and people would let you through and you could just show your ID and that was it. It's a little harder now. Yeah. But it's a lot of fun, and it's very important for Kansas. We're very involved in a lot of discussions going on in the White House and in other areas, and we've been doing that for a number of months now. And so we're very gratified that they're willing to have us.
What are you hearing from teachers in Kansas about the president's idea of having teachers perhaps get a bonus if they're trained to be armed?
Kansas is looking at Kansas solutions, and much of those decisions in our state are really made on the local level, and so we're just starting to hear different communities looking at different opportunities for them and how they want to approach that. There's a wide diversity of views, as everyone knows, but in Kansas, They want to be very practical and very pragmatic, and this may be a good solution.
And what do you see as the potential advantages of this solution?
Well, for starters, it's where the people are, and that's the.
No, but excuse me, the advantages of the president's idea of having the armed teachers.
Right, but that's where the students are, and that's where the security issue is immediately. That, though, is really a very local decision on how we see it, because different schools have a different setup, and the different community standards in this. We're exploring this right now, and you'll start hearing a lot more about it, I think, as this discussion expands across the U.S.
So you would say potentially promising?
Yes.
And why potentially promising?
Well, I think that's just one good solution. There are a whole bunch of these issues, and it's not just the gun control issue. It's not just the mental health issue. It's not just the building itself. This is a multi-point situation, and it's something, for me, it's the tenacity of continuing to deal with this thing over years. And that's what these problems take, is it takes a multi-year approach. If there were a magic arrow for this, we'd all take that, but.
Governor, last question for you. You, instead of going on vacation, you go to war zones. So you've been to Afghanistan, you've been to Iraq, you've been to the Baltics. Tell us what takes you to war zones when the rest of us are on the beach.
Growing up in Kansas, I believe in service and making a difference in people's lives. And I first volunteered when the Soviets were occupying Afghanistan, and we were training medics and taking care of people in Afghanistan. Since then, we've been in places. I was only serving in southern Rwanda during the genocide. We've been in Libya, Central African Republic, the Balkans, about 20 different conflict zones. I've seen the very worst in people and the very best in it. And, we need to make a difference in that. And you can on a humanitarian basis. And for me, that service, that's what animates me. And that's also what I think is so special about Kansas, is that sense of service. And these kids that we have now, they're doing some really exciting things.
And as we say goodbye, what are you looking forward to in your next couple of days in the swamp?
Yes, we'll keep our head above water, of course. But no, I've got a number of meetings here, and we're working in a whole bunch of different areas, everything from transportation to trade to Medicaid and dealing with those issues. And it's going to be a good week.
Governor Collier, thank you very much, and congratulations. This is month 2, right? Yeah. Thank you very much for joining us on the Axios stage. Appreciate you. Have a great time. Thank you very much, Governor Collier. We want to thank all of our governors. Thank the 74 and the Walton Family Foundation for making this fantastic education conversation possible. Thanks C-SPAN for being here. We appreciate your coverage. Thank all of you for coming out so early this morning. Thank you for the Axios events team for pulling this off, and I'll see you on Axios.com.